From the field to the film room to the war room, we've got you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now. Welcome to the Chalkboard, my fellow football nerds, for episode number 43 of Chalk Talk, brought to you by the Painted Lines. I'm your host, Shane Haff, and you can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. I'm joined today by dueling co-hosts. First of all, we've got Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. _. We've also got Deibs. You can give him a follow on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. We're going to be diving into draft content in the coming days. Before we get into that, how are you guys doing today?
I start? Yeah. Stressed out, man. This is NBA trade deadline day. We're just a few hours away from it. Just literally refreshing Twitter. If I wasn't doing this right now, I would literally just be pacing around my house and just trying to find things to keep myself busy. But I am stressed the F out.
Yeah, I'm right with Deibs. Anyone who's watching, you see Deibs, the Sixers hat on. We are Deibs Sixers fans, so we are waiting with the rest of the world on Ben Simmons, James Harden news. Who knows when it could break? It could break while we're breaking down, while we're arguing about Desmond Ritter and Carson Strong. So if you want to see a crazy reaction, hope for a Harden trade and keep watching this. Keep watching the stream. We have to kick Shane out and turn it into a James Harden trade reaction.
Well, as the great friend and co-host that I am, we plan this to keep you guys busy so you don't pull all your hair out waiting on the NBA trade deadline. So we've got a great show lined up for you guys today. We're going to do our positional breakdowns. We're starting with the most important position. We're starting with the quarterback position. We're going to be breaking down our top 5 prospects in this upcoming draft. And every week leading up to the draft, we're going to do one of the position groups. So by the time we get to the draft, you'll be well prepared for all of the top guys, all the top names that you're going to hear. Hopefully when you join our live draft show in late April when the draft comes. So before we get started, though, if you're watching out there on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, smash that subscribe button, that follow button, turn on notifications so you don't miss us. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate that. And if you're watching live, drop us a comment here as we go along. We'd love to interact with you guys on the show. So starting off here, we're going to work from 5 to 1 because we don't want to give you number 1 early. We want that suspense to build while you try to figure out, did they leave my guy out of the top 5 altogether? Mm-hmm. We want that suspense to build for you guys. So I'm going to kick it to Deibs first. Deibs, who is your QB5 in this draft? And talk a little bit about him.
Sorry, Mark. My number 5 is Carson Strong. Just absolutely insane arm talent. Here are my positives. He had 5 50-yard passes last year, which led all of the college football last season. One of those raw quarterback prospects that can fit the ball into any kind of tight or closing windows with ease. Like this guy, when you watch tape, his effectiveness throwing across the middle of the field, whether that's 10 yards or 40 yards, it looks incredibly smooth. It looks incredibly natural, just jaw-dropping touch at times. I think he plays with excellent poise. I think he's a gunslinger in the truest sense. This is a quarterback that loves to take shots down the field. But what's more impressive about Carson Strong here is that turnover-worthy play rate, just 2% last year, the 6th lowest rate of any FBS quarterback. He's also thrown just 12 interceptions on 882 attempts over the last 2 years. The negatives, he's got the worst legs in the draft. You're rarely going to find Carson Strong extending plays, scrambling out of the pocket. His ability to read the pocket and step up or scramble is an area that has to be improved if he wants to be an NFL starter. I think he's got heavy feet. I think he struggled against pressure last year. This was the guy that I was most excited to watch during the Senior Bowl, and it was a lot of ups and downs. He had 5 drives during the Senior Bowl that resulted in 0 points, one that led to a missed field goal attempt. I think his reviews were mixed at best. But that being said, this guy, I think if you can get him in the 2nd round, maybe to a team like Pittsburgh, I think he's a great value pick in that 2nd round area.
All right. My number 5 is also Carson Strong. So Deibs and I are in agreement on our QB5. This is a guy playing for Nevada. He played in an air raid system. So he's got a lot of experience out of the shotgun, not necessarily much under center. Utilized a lot of empty backfields, 5 wide or 4 wide with a running back, throwing to tight ends a lot. He's got maybe some of the best arm talent in the class. I think this is a guy, he can make all the throws. He can make the throws from hash to outside the numbers. He can make layered throws over the middle. There's not a throw that you can ask him to make that he can't. He manipulates the middle of the field defenders with his eyes really well. That's one of probably his biggest strengths, in my opinion. I think he does a really good job of getting through progressions. He puts the ball where it needs to be if he's given time. The problem for me is what happens if he's not given the time. If pressure starts to come, he tends to struggle because he doesn't have escapability. This guy doesn't move at all. And I try not to factor in injury concerns too much into my evaluations because I just don't have the medical checks that teams are going to have. But the issues with his knee are documented. He's had the screws put in when he was in high school. He's had an additional surgery done. And so it's something that you have to be a little bit concerned about along the way. And he just doesn't move out of the pocket. In college, he had negative 305 yards rushing. Now, I know that counts in sacks, but this isn't a guy that you're going to be able to roll the pocket with. He's not a guy that's a threat with his legs. And in a league that's moving towards pocket passers becoming a dying breed, I just can't find myself putting Carson Strong much higher than number 5.
I definitely disagree with some things that they said, but they laid out the positives as well and why he's still in their top 5 with their concerns. But my number 5 QB, and I'll talk about Carson Strong later on in my list because he is on my top 5. But my number 5 QB is Desmond Ritter out of Cincinnati. My concern with Desmond Ritter is he's been the same quarterback since 2018. You look at his numbers, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021. They're kind of the same each year. I mean, 2021 is his best year. It's the year that he also played the most games in, and he improved in certain areas like yards per attempt. But when you saw him as a freshman at Cincinnati, who, you know, they are it's not a mid-major, it's football, but they are not a Power 5 school necessarily, but they still are, you know, like the best of that next conference, and they kind of are the class of the AAC. So he's playing with good talent around him. There's plenty of other Cincinnati guys that are going in this draft. So it's not like I don't really compare it to Nevada, where Nevada, Carson Strong's really playing around no one. With Desmond Ritter, my concern with Desmond Ritter is when you saw him as a freshman, you went, wow, this guy is very poised for being so young, and they're playing him right away. And, you know, he's got 4 more years to keep getting better and better and better. And you have a great coach in Luke Fickell. You've had great offensive and defensive coordinators who have gotten poached to go elsewhere. You've got plenty of guys getting drafted. And he's kind of been the same. Freshman year, he was 62% completion percentage, 2,400 yards, 20 touchdowns, 5 picks. The next year, he threw for 300 less yards, 2 less touchdowns with 4 more picks in the same amount of games. The next year, he throws for 19 touchdowns with 6 picks. The completion percentage goes up a little bit to 66%, but we're talking about a 62% completion percentage guy who's below 8 yards per attempt and has thrown a good amount of picks for the lack of touchdowns that he's thrown for. He can make some things happen with his legs. It'll be interesting to see how he tests out athletically in terms of the 40 time, but I have a lot of concerns with Desmond Ritter. To me, this is a 4 QB draft class, and Ritter would be tied with Sam Howell, who I ended up leaving out as my number 6.
All right, so just to recap here, we've got it up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Obviously, if you're listening later on Apple Podcasts, I'll tweet this graphic out when we're done. But at number 5, both Deibs and I have Carson Strong. Mark has Desmond Ritter. Deibs, lead us off with your number 4.
Matt Corral is my number 4 here. I think he's got legit tools. I think his success in the NFL will surely be determined by kind of where he goes and how much that offense can be designed around him. I think this is a guy that I was really high on coming into the draft process, but I've kind of soured as of late. I think he's a great leader. I think he's a great competitor. I think he has a resume of, you know, doing it well against top-notch competition. But I also think his athleticism won't always be there to kind of bail him out in the NFL. I think he's got obviously great mobility. I think he's got very good accuracy. I think he has a quick, insanely quick release. I think he has zero issues kind of hitting guys in stride. I think he's got solid deep ball placement. But you also have to consider he ran a ton of scripted pass plays at Ole Miss. On the other end, he did deal with a lot of injuries on that team. So, kudos to Matt Corral for, having a very, very productive football career there for Ole Miss. But for me, the negatives, I just like when you can I think he can make plays with his arms and leg. I just don't think he has great arm strength. I think his decision-making at times can be in question. There were too many times when I saw on tape last year where he forced a pass into double coverage or he was just way too reckless with the ball. And he's also just as dangerous with his legs. Like, this is a guy who plays with a fearless rushing style, and he got injured because of that multiple times with lower leg injuries. That simply cannot happen at the next level. Right now, I'm seeing Matt Corral in that top 20 discussion, and I just think that's a little crazy. I think that's just a massive reach. For me, he is my number 4.
All right. Matt Corral is also my QB4 in this draft from Ole Miss. I think Deibs hit on it perfectly. This is a guy that when he decides to throw, he's got a really quick release, maybe one of the more compact releases in the draft. I think he has good mechanics in the pocket. I think he's got good accuracy when he's out on the move. He's a guy that I feel like, he can move. You can move the pocket with him. But the problem with him is exactly what Deibs said, that this isn't a guy who has much experience dropping back and reading a field and making decisions. He just wasn't asked to do that at Ole Miss. This season, he had 131 dropbacks without an RPO, play action, or a screen, which ranked 120th in the FBS. His passing grade per PFF on those 131 straight dropbacks was a 76.2. Versus a guy like Kenny Pickett, we're going to get to in a minute, that had 440 of those dropbacks, and he had a grade of a 93. So Corral's just not a guy, in my opinion, that's been asked to deal with much pressure, process the field, and go through progressions. I think he's aggressive as a runner, but he's also short and skinny. So you wonder what the upside is with him. You wonder, what his ceiling could be, and if he's going to be able to avoid injuries playing like that. Like, when I watch Matt Corral, when I think about him, I think of what the Dolphins are doing with Tua right now and how limited that is. And we've talked about that throughout the season. And that's kind of what I see that you're going to have to do with Corral for him to succeed in the NFL. And so I'm not very high on Corral. He is my QB4 in this class. What about you, Mark?
Great minds think alike, because all three of us have Matt Corral at number 4. And Matt Corral's the guy in this class that I have the least read on. Like, I can't get my definitive opinion in my head about what Matt Corral is, because, and I think the main reason is, you look at his junior and senior years, he was a completely different player. In his junior year, that was Lane Kiffin's first year at Ole Miss. They were going full on air raid, lane train, throw it all over the field. Matt Corral had a game where I think he threw, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 interceptions. I think it was a 6 interception game in 2020. So he was kind of just like chuck and duck, kind of throwing it all over the field, a little bit risky at times, but then there was such high reward. His yards per attempt in his junior year was 10.2. And then you go to this last year, I should say, in 2021, when Ole Miss was a lot better of a football team. And they kind of made it a little bit more conservative in terms of what they did in the passing offense. His yards per attempt dropped down to 8.7. He threw for 9 less touchdowns in 3 more games. But the positive there, they won a lot more games. And he also only threw 5 interceptions as opposed to 14 the year before. So if I'm right that he threw 6 in that game, then he threw less interceptions in 2021 than he did in that one game in 2020. If it was 5, then he threw as many. But I kind of don't know what he is. Is he that junior guy that's going to take a lot of chances and that's going to throw it all over the field? Or is he the senior I don't know if he was is he the junior actually in 2021 that relied on his legs a lot and that kind of kept it within the intermediate routes a lot more than going deep? Maybe he can mix that and get the best of both worlds. And maybe that means he should be higher on my list because he is kind of multidimensional and he can do a lot of things. But there's a lot of concerns for me in terms of those interceptions in 2020 and then in terms of not taking any chances in 2021. So I kind of don't know who he is. That's where I'm at with Matt Corral. And by the way, I left this off with Desmond Ritter. And I think there might be some conversation coming in for Desmond Ritter here. But the reason that I'm also so low on him in terms of having him at number 5 below Matt Corral is, like you said, Matt Corral did show up against really good competition in the SEC. And this year, Matt Corral didn't have a great team on Ole Miss. A lot of those guys went to the NFL last year. So Matt Corral stood in the pocket and, like you said, got killed and got injured. And he was a tough guy and played the best against the best opponents. For Desmond Ritter, we saw him against Alabama really pee down his leg and really look disappointing. And even against Notre Dame, I think he ended up throwing 60% completion percentage, 290 yards. But if you watch the game, Notre Dame did not play well in that game, and it felt like he could have picked Notre Dame apart. And it was still only like a 20-13 or a 21-13 game. So he left a lot to be desired in the biggest games. So that's why I'm lower on Ritter than Corral.
All right, so it is a straight sweep at QB4 for all three of us with Matt Corral. Let's move on to our QB3. Deibs, lead us off here. Who's your guy?
Desmond Ritter. For me, I think he checks off a lot of boxes. I think he's got solid size. I think he's a very capable runner, either on design quarterback runs or just on scrambles. I think he's got a lot of promise in the pocket. I think this is a prospect who isn't like elite at any one thing. I don't think he has the elite quickness of Malik Willis, who we're talking about. I don't think he has the arm strength of Carson Strong here, but I think he's good to very good in a lot of different areas. Compared to some of like the other projected first round picks like Corral or Pickett, I think this guy has just as high of a ceiling, maybe even more. I agree, Mark. This guy is extremely raw, but if he's there in that round 2 area, I think that's incredible value for this guy. And similar to my number 2 quarterback, I think this is one of those like toolsy quarterback prospects that will need time to develop, but will be absolutely worth the risk. He had a really strong week of practices at the Senior Bowl. He played really well during the Senior Bowl. He had 2 touchdowns. The negatives is his accuracy. I think it begins and ends with his accuracy here. This is a guy who was benched early on last year nearly benched last year because of his accuracy issues. He went through stretches where his accuracy was absolutely god-awful. And I think he just needs that year in the NFL of kind of improving his lower body mechanics, which should help him immensely moving forward. He needs to be a better, quick, or more quick decision maker with the ball in his hands. I kind of see a lot of Jalen Hurts in this guy. He's a great leader. I just think there's areas of weakness could be coached up. Again, this depends on like what your projections are for the bulk of these quarterbacks in this class. For me, they're not high. They're like pretty much a starter to fringe starter kind of type of quarterbacks. So for me, that's my number 3.
All right, my number 3 is also Desmond Ritter. I swear Deibs and I did not compare lists, and we're going to disagree here in just a minute. But for Ritter, like Deibs was talking about, he's a dual threat player, and he's got a big arm. He's very athletic, but a lot of times you see that archetype of player come into the league, the physically gifted guy who was, the fastest on the field, and he had the big arm in college, and you can see them come into the NFL and struggle to process the field when they're playing against equal or better athletes. And Desmond Ritter is a guy who certainly struggled to process against Alabama. He looked awful against top competition at the college level. And so that's a question mark for him coming in. Another question mark is his accuracy. He's got such scattershot accuracy. He's got really high peaks and really low floors. Like you'll see him come out the first drive and you'll see him throw a ball 6 feet over a guy's head on a crossing route. And then the next drive, he'll come in and he'll just put a perfect throw in a bucket. So, we tend to grade inaccuracy on a sliding scale. And, it's really not much difference if it's just slightly uncatchable or totally uncatchable, unless it ends up in the arms as a safety. But Ritter needs to get some consistency with his accuracy. And I think a lot of that stems from his footwork. He's got real hit or miss footwork in the pocket. If you watch him in the pocket, he's good at sliding in the pocket. He doesn't leave clean pockets a lot like some mobile quarterbacks do, but his footwork just isn't all there. He struggles to align his hips to targets when he's not operating from his ideal spot. So he can slide, but he struggles to reset those feet, point his hips, get that rotation and drive the ball. And so that's a concern for me. The other thing for me is just that he doesn't have an elite defining trait. Like if you want elite athleticism in this class, it's Malik Willis. If you want elite accuracy, it's Kenny Pickett. If you want the elite arm, it's Strong. And so he's kind of a jack of all trades, I guess, master of none. And you wonder about, if you've got a guy with one elite trait, you can kind of coach up the rest of that. For a guy that's just kind of decent at everything, you wonder what the ceiling is going to be for that. So I think Ritter can succeed if you get him in an offense that's going to utilize him in the running game and develop some sort of vertical shot offense behind that. But he's not going to be a fit for every team. And he is going to have to work on that accuracy. And we've seen guys come in from the college level, and we tend to, as draft analysts, say, well, they've got an arm, we can fix the accuracy. And that's just not always the case. And so that's my biggest concern with Ritter. But he does come in as my QB3.
My QB number 3 is Malik Willis, a quarterback out of Liberty. He transferred from Auburn a few years ago to Liberty. And you look at Malik Willis, and if you're a Lamar Jackson fan, that's what you're hoping for. I mean, you're squinting and you're hoping for Lamar Jackson, and you're hoping that he kind of has maybe even a little bit more alive of an arm than Lamar did, or but he has similar accuracy issues. He has similar issues than Lamar had coming out of college that made Lamar fall to 32. Now, does he have quite the electric speed and quite the electric playmaking that Lamar had? No, and I don't think anyone that's ever been in the NFL really does. So I don't think it's quite fair to say he's Lamar Jackson, but that's the archetype. That's the type of offense you would want to build around Malik Willis. And I do think that the reason he was a little bit disappointing in his senior year was because they tried to make him stay in the pocket, and they tried to make him rely on his arm a little bit too much. And we saw in games where they went against teams like Ole Miss and other teams that he was overmatched and they were overmatched. And you hope that that's an issue based on the talent that was around Malik Willis and not Malik Willis's inability to process. There are concerns with Malik Willis, but I'd be hard-pressed to say that Malik Willis' upside isn't as high as anyone else in this class, in my opinion. I think that the top 3 quarterbacks on my list are actually being a little bit discounted when people are talking about this year being a down year for quarterbacks. I think my top 3, my tier 1 in terms of my quarterbacks this year, I would grade as first-round prospects in any year. It's an interesting conversation that I'm sure we'll get into more in the offseason. Shane made a comment off-air, too. We were talking about it, and he said Mac Jones was drafted QB5 last year, and I believe he was also Shane's QB5. And he said that that Mac Jones would check in as QB1 for him in this draft class. Mac Jones would rank probably a little bit behind Malik Willis for me, because I do think Malik Willis's upside is higher than I can ever.
Oh, Mark froze for a second. And Deibs
year 1 starter. That's an acceptable starting quarterback. Am I back? An acceptable starting quarterback in the NFL. But I do think that Malik Willis has a high upside. And yeah, there's a comment. Malik Willis is a poor man's Cordell Stewart. He could be. Cordell Stewart wasn't that bad, I don't think, but I'd have to look at the numbers. But he could be like a below average quarterback, and he could never reach that height. But when you see guys like Lamar Jackson and you see plenty of other mobile quarterbacks be able to use that so much in their game, even Jalen Hurts this year. Talk about Jalen Hurts, who Malik Willis is more athletic than and faster than, for sure, with a better arm. Malik Willis can do the same kind of things for his team in the NFL in the future that Jalen Hurts did for us on third down this year. Jalen Hurts, I believe, finished with the most third down conversions with his legs for a quarterback this year. Malik Willis could do a very similar thing and make third down a lot easier for whatever team he's on. But my top 3 in terms of quarterbacks, I could see being ranked anyway, and I'd have no problem with it. I think all 3 are legit starting quarterback options.
All right, so recapping number 3, both Deibs and I had Desmond Ritter. Mark has Malik Willis. Deibs, kick us over to your number 2. Who comes in number 2 for you?
Number 2 is Malik Willis. Speed, and more speed. Like everyone knew coming in, this was a mobile quarterback prospect coming into the Senior Bowl last week. But this dude clocked in at 20.58 miles per hour at practice over the entire week last week at the Senior Bowl. Only Arizona's Kyler Murray clocked in a faster time last year in the NFL. That's pretty impressive. Willis's ability to just escape pressure, hit the jets, and get into that second level of a defense is really, really fun to watch. In the pocket, obviously, he has incredible arm strength. The ball just pops out of his hand. That is just extremely noticeable. His arm strength, I think, is right up there with Carson Strong at the top of this class. I don't have any doubt that for me, Malik Willis, while he's raw, and I'll get into in a second, he has the best chance for me to become an elite quarterback under the right development, under the right guidance. moving forward. And I'm just really excited to see this guy, put on an NFL jersey, because for me, like, this guy is must watch TV on Sundays the second he's starting. And the negatives, there are several. He holds on the ball way too long. Way more often than not, he's staring down wide receivers. He struggles to go through his progressions. His mechanics are not good. His base is incredibly inconsistent. He's constantly throwing the ball on his back foot. He has some really poor games in his career against some really bad competition that certainly raises a lot of red flags. As I've said during my previous shows here, like, Malik Willis is the ultimate boomer bust draft pick in wild card pick in this 2022 class. He's a major risk, no question. But I think the question is, are you willing to wait and let this kid develop? To me, the majority of these quarterbacks in this class are kind of borderline fringe to good starters in the NFL. We all know what an elite quarterback can do for an NFL franchise. So I think this is one of the most fascinating prospects in this draft. For me, if he's there for the Eagles in round 2, you would definitely really heavily think about it. I think his just tools are that good.
All right. Moving on to my quarterback 2, and this is where I'm going to diverge from everybody else, at least from Deibs. Our lists won't be exactly the same. My QB 2 in the draft is Kenny Pickett out of Pittsburgh. Kenny Pickett, to me, he is the highest floor, safest pick in the draft at QB. If you're a GM that's, GMs don't get a lot of shots to pick a quarterback. You get one shot. And so if you're a GM and you want to save your job, are you going to take a risk on a guy like Malik Willis that there's a lot of projection, or are you going to take the safe pick to save your job in Kenny Pickett? And this is why I think Kenny Pickett is going to go off the board first in the draft, although he's not my QB1, is just how safe he is. He's got good mechanics. He's had a lot of growth over his 4 years. The biggest concern for me with Kenny Pickett is that he's already at his ceiling. He's going to be 24 years old when he gets to the draft. He comes into the draft as a late bloomer. He wasn't really highly thought of until the senior year when he just had his coming out party. And I've seen people talk a lot about Joe Burrow. Obviously, Burrow's in the Super Bowl, and so he's on the mind. And people say, well, Joe Burrow, he had his coming out party as a senior year too, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, Burrow threw 39 passes before his junior year. And he wasn't bad his junior year, 16-5 touchdown to interception. Kenny Pickett threw 1,177 passes in college before his breakout year. And so my concern is that he just stuck around in college long enough that all the more talented guys went to the NFL, and then all of a sudden he was the talented guy on the field. I think he's safe. He's athletic. I think he's good at making guys miss in the pocket. He's not a guy you're going to design run concepts around, but he's athletic. You can watch him play. Famously, his fake slide play went viral on Twitter and caused the NCAA to change the rules. So this is a guy that can do some damage, but you're not going to design a QB running offense for him. He's got really good ball placement. He can make, different types of throws. He can layer those throws in. I wouldn't say he has an elite arm, but he's got a strong arm. He has an above average NFL arm. And the thing you're going to hear everybody talk about in the draft cycle is his hand size, right? How big is his hand? It's been rumored that he's going to measure in with a 8.25-inch hand size. Okay, 9 inches is considered the threshold. If you want to measure this for yourself at home, you spread your hand out. It's from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your pinky. My hand is 8.5. My hand is bigger than Kenny Pickett's. That's not ideal. That said, who cares? Like, it'd be one thing if this guy played at the University of Miami or USC or Oklahoma. He played at Pitt. You've seen him in outdoor stadiums in bad weather conditions, and it was fine. So I'm not necessarily concerned about the hand size here with Pickett. Much will be made of it. I think a lot of it's white noise. So that's Pickett for me. High floor, low ceiling, in my opinion. Safe pick, but I don't think he's ever going to be an elite quarterback. What about you, Mark?
My number 2 is a guy that was disrespected earlier on in this podcast. No, I'm joking. It's Carson Strong, quarterback out of Nevada. If you follow me on Twitter, I've been tweeting incessantly about him since September. I love this kid. I think he's got the best arm of this draft class, and I don't think it's even necessarily close. This guy, he can make every single throw on the field. And I know that there's concerns with his knee, which I'm not really thinking about because he did just play a full season where there weren't any really concerns about his leg. But and then Besides, if you take the concerns out with the injury, he did have something in high school as well, and he had an injury in college. But if you take the injury concerns out, the concern is obviously that he's not a mobile quarterback. If anyone knows how I evaluate quarterbacks, almost always gravitate towards mobile QBs. But I do think Carson Strong is being disrespected because of that kind of motion that the league is going in with. You need to have every quarterback be a mobile quarterback. I compare this guy to a Mac Jones, where I think this guy has a much better arm than Mac Jones had, and I think has a better in terms of upside than Mac Jones does. And Mac Jones, even with having no mobile ability, was able to step in and be a starting quarterback in his first year. I don't think Carson Strong's able to do that. He didn't play at Alabama. He played at Nevada. I think that there's a lot that he'd have to learn about an NFL scheme. I think he's a project, but you look at the upside that he has and the stats that he put up. This guy has everything I'd want in terms of the passing ability of a quarterback, and just comparing him to Desmond Ritter, because these are guys that have played for multiple years at the same place. In the last 2 years with Carson Strong, he's had 63 touchdowns and 12 picks with 7,100 yards on 70% completion percentage. And in the last 2 years with Desmond Ritter, he's had 5,600 yards on 49 touchdowns and 14 picks on 65% completion percentage. And that was in 3 more games. So Carson Strong had 14 more touchdowns, 2 less picks, 1,500 more yards, and 5% better on completion percentage in 3 less games. So I do think that that's relevant to bring up when you do, because you do have to factor in the fact that Ritter is a elite prospect in terms of his ability to run the ball as a quarterback. He's a very good mobile quarterback, and Strong doesn't have that at all. So there is a gap there, but I do think that that's more than made up for with the passing statistics that you've seen with them the last 2 years. I think Carson Strong's upside is just as high as Malik Willis, just in a completely different way. I think that they're kind of a fun little comp because they're both from these small schools. They're both such projects. I don't think either of them should be starting in the first year, but I think both have, Pro Bowl upside. Carson Strong, in terms of comps, I've always been saying that I see a lot of Jay Cutler in him. I think that there's a lot of Jay Cutler to his game, and people forget that Jay Cutler was a pretty damn good quarterback for a while. And then I've always said the completely unathletic version of Josh Allen in terms of what he can do with his arm. But then Jack Fritz from WIP slid on my DMs when I was talking about Carson Strong on Twitter, and Philly fans will love this. He sees Nick Foles in Carson Strong. So that's a fun little Philly nugget here for the Philly people. So Carson Strong, whether he's Cutler, Josh Allen, or Nick Foles, I'll put him as my QB2.
All right, so this is our first slot where none of us had the same guy at QB2. So to recap, Deibs had Malik Willis. I put Kenny Pickett. Mark has Carson Strong. That brings us to number 1. If you're following along using your powers of deduction, you probably already know who our number 1s are. But Deibs, why don't you go ahead and tell us, who do you have QB1 in this draft?
Kenny Pickett is my number 1 in this class. He always has been. I just think he's a solid decision maker, very physical runner. He makes some really nice throws on the run, mostly to the right side when you watch the tape. He's not afraid to improvise, which is, I think, where his tape truly shines. Pickett really, truly has some amazing highlight reel throws while improvising and on the run. I think this is the type of quarterback who will escape the sack, dodge a rusher, sprint right, and then throw 40 yards downfield in stride, right on the money. And he's just really impressive to watch. Between the years, though, I think is where Kenny Pickett also shines. And this is probably where he cements himself as the number 1 quarterback in the class. When you watch the tape, you can see him go through his progressions. He can do full field progressions. I think Pickett is extremely intelligent. I think he's a very accurate quarterback, and he can play between the numbers. He can throw the ball down the field, whatever you want to do. We saw in the Senior Bowl, those quick passes, quick strike passes. That is his bread and butter early on in the NFL. The negatives, I think his accuracy can be off at times. I think, like you said, Shane, like people are going a little too crazy about this hand size thing. He wore 2 gloves while at Pitt. But I'm pretty sure Joe Burrow and Michael Vick also had like really small hands, and they did okay as well. So it's also important to note that, the O-line at Pitt was not very good last year. There are times when he, had trouble facing pressure last year. But I think he's got everything you're looking for in a starting quarterback. I think for me, Pickett is the number 1 quarterback. Honestly, because the quarterback class is lacking. That conversation where he would fall compared to last year's draft is a real thing on my end. But I think Pickett is a very solid starter in the NFL next year.
All right. For my QB1, I have my guy Malik Willis out of Liberty. I debated back and forth between Willis and Pickett, but ultimately I landed on Willis, a guy who I think he's got the highest ceiling in this class, the most upside. Now he's probably got the lowest floor as well. So this is a high variance guy. It could go either way. He has a huge arm. If you put on highlights of him, you're going to see jaw-dropping throws that he can make. But he struggles with touch. You'll see him take a receiver's head off on a 5-yard drag or something because he just doesn't have that touch element to his game. And so because of that, he struggles to layer throws. This is a guy that wants to fire the ball downfield outside the numbers, or he wants to run. He doesn't really want to utilize the middle of the field a ton. He can make reads in the pocket, but once he gets off of that spot, once he gets moved off his spot by a pass rush, he drops his eyes and he's looking to run. He's not comfortable sliding in the pocket and resetting his feet like you often see with mobile quarterbacks. As soon as they feel that pressure, they want to get out of the pocket and run. Much like, Jalen Hurts early in this year, he would roll out, drop his eyes, and he was looking to run. Willis can have erratic mechanics, a lot of times, again, affected by pressure. And he took a lot of sacks this year. He had a 13.1% sack rate in 2021. The previous high sack rate in college football since 2010 was Lamar Jackson at 8.5%. So he nearly doubled the second closest guy in terms of the sacks he took. And you can talk about offensive line, and certainly Liberty doesn't have the best offensive line, but Eagles fans will realize, watching Carson Wentz in 2020, sacks are often a QB stat too, especially when you're as mobile as Malik Willis. You can get away from sacks. And if you're taking them that often, it says something about you as well. But the athleticism with this guy is just top notch. Like, he's 220 pounds. He's supposed to run a 4.3 40. That just doesn't happen. If Malik Willis goes to a team and he's a starter next year, he will instantly be the second best rushing quarterback behind Lamar Jackson. Nobody else in the NFL has his athleticism except for Lamar. Now, I think a team that's going to start him year one, it's going to go pretty poorly. This is not a guy that's ready to start. In fact, the only guy I would feel comfortable starting year one is Kenny Pickett. None of the rest of these guys are ready. They need a year to work on mechanics. And, we throw out the you need to sit a year thing, and people talk about like Aaron Rodgers, and some guys just need to get in and play. But the reality is when you have mechanical issues, you can't focus on those. You can't focus on learning to read the field when you're trying to learn a playbook so you can play at the same time. Malik Willis would greatly benefit from going somewhere knowing that he's not going to be the starter. Maybe he's a game day inactive the first year so he can just work with the quarterback coach, work on his mechanics, start to pick those sorts of things up. I think that'd be the best thing for him. He's tough to evaluate, honestly, because of the context he played in. He had, bad receivers. He was throwing to guys that are going to be Uber drivers next year. And so you see that on the tape. He had poor offensive design. Liberty's out here catching strays, but they don't exactly have the best and brightest of the coaches that are available. And so he will benefit from going to the NFL, playing with NFL caliber talent and coaching, but it's going to take time with this guy. He is my QB1, but I do not want to see him on the field in year one.
My QB1 is Kenny Pickett from Pitt. This is a guy who I really like. I do think he'd be right with Justin Fields and Trey Lance on my rankings from last year. I had Fields and Lance pretty much tied as QB2 in my rankings last year. For this year, I have Pickett 1, and it's because I know Shane, you don't want to hear the Joe Burrow comp, but I've been saying it since November. I see so much Joe Burrow in this guy's game, and it has nothing to do with, Joe Burrow being the hot name in the Super Bowl right now. And I know that he did play much more than Joe Burrow did in his first 2 years. But if you just take out those first 2 years with Kenny Pickett and you look at his junior year and his senior year, it lines up extremely favorably. And he did play all 5 years at Pitt and was a game manager until this year. So you could look at that and be negative and say that, he just learned and was much older than everyone else on the field. I would look at it and say use it as a positive because he is, like you said, the only guy I would trust to be ready to play this year. And he did have 4,319 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 7 picks in 13 games last year on 67% completion percentage. I think he should have been considered for the Heisman more than he was. They've been bowl eligible the last 4 years, but he led Pitt to an ACC title for the first time in a long time. Like, this guy is someone who changed the culture at Pitt for Pat Narduzzi. And now Pitt brought in another transfer, Keon Slovis from USC. They're going to keep rolling without him, but it does seem like Pitt has been leveled up just by proxy of having Kenny Pickett last year. And he shocked me this year. But it's not, I guess it shouldn't have been so shocking because his football IQ is so high. And I think we saw that with the fake slide, which it was such an incredible play. Like just the thought process to do that in a game really did make me think of this guy's football IQ on a different level. I know I don't want to overreact to one play, but I do think on the biggest of stages, pulling that out for someone that's not regarded as being super athletic, I do think that was incredible. And I think that he did show down the stretch that he could use his legs in close games down the stretch to win games for the team. And I think he's a guy who will be ready to play right away like a Burrow. And he never threw double-digit picks, even in his early years. That's always something I look at with college quarterbacks. I think that shows his intelligence, and I think he's risk-averse. And in terms of even more comparing him to Joe Burrow, the hand size. Like, he's got low hand size. Joe Burrow had the lowest hand size since Michael Vick, I believe, of anyone that was recorded. So I do think that hand size is, if anything, I think it's a confirmation bias tool. Like, I think it's something where if you see a guy like Daniel Jones in college who's fumbling the ball a lot, and you see him struggling with turnovers, and then you also see that the hand size is really low, then you're like, oh, I'm not going to take him because he's turning the ball over and because he has hand size. But if there's no signs that the hand size is hurting him, I don't really take that the Pickett thing too seriously. It is weird. His thumb, he's saying that it's double jointed and you can't move it a certain way that would help him with the measurement. I don't know how much I buy that. It's a little weird, but in terms of, he is definitely by far the safest prospect in this class to start right away. And the readiness to play, Shane mentioned it. And he mentioned the mechanics of the other guys and that being what kind of makes them a no-go in terms of starting right away. It's also about the competition that you played against. And Pickett played against not the SEC, but he played in the ACC, he played against NFL guys, and he played in the Power 5. You look at that and you compare it to guys like Malik Willis from Liberty, guys like Carson Strong from Nevada, guys like Desmond Ritter even at Cincinnati. I do think that level of competition that he's played has been much higher than those other three guys I mentioned. So I think that's just as big of a part of being able to play right away as mechanics are. And I think we saw that with guys like Burrow and Herbert stepping in right away, even Mac Jones this year.
I will say that at the Senior Bowl, Kenny Pickett had an opportunity to separate himself. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he did that.
Seems like Willis did.
Yeah, it seems like Willis did. And I was right there neck and neck with Willis versus Pickett for QB1 and the Senior Bowl study. And it's like the first hurdle. You still have combine, you still got pro days. And these are not necessarily final rankings. They could shift as we get closer to the draft. But Pickett had a chance to separate himself, and I don't think he did. I don't think he had a bad week. Mm-hmm. I thought the worst thing for him was on Tuesday in the practices in the rain. He wouldn't take the glove off, and it kind of struggled. He struggled with the accuracy. I thought he could have done a lot to sway people to be convinced that, the hand size wasn't an issue, and I thought he missed that opportunity. But not necessarily a negative performance for him, but more a positive one for Malik Willis down at the Senior Bowl that led to my ending rankings there. So that is our top 5 QB ratings. To recap, from 5 to 1, Deibs went Carson Strong, number 5, Matt Corral, number 4, Desmond Ritter, QB 3, Malik Willis, QB 2, and Kenny Pickett, QB 1. I went number 5, Carson Strong, number 4, Matt Corral, number 3, Desmond Ritter, number 2, Kenny Pickett, and number 1, Malik Willis. And Mark went number 5, Desmond Ritter, number 4, Matt Corral, number 3, Malik Willis, number 2, Carson Strong, and number 1, Kenny Pickett. So, guys, before we get out of here, does anybody have anybody's name they want to throw out? An honorable mention guy, a guy that just missed the cut of your top 5?
Do you want to go first?
Me?
I mean, Sam Howell was the guy that I probably had in this ranking until he just was not impressive at all during the Senior Bowl. So that was the guy that just missed the cut.
Yeah, Sam Howell was a guy that it was conversations last offseason. Is he going to be QB1 or is Spencer Rattler? And you saw what happened to both of those guys. And it hurts you when opening weekend of college football, you take 6 sacks, throw 3 picks, and you lose to Virginia Tech. And people were just kind of done with Howell then. His team only won 5 games this year. I do think you got to remember, like, every decent weapon on their roster left for the NFL last year. And we talked about these guys, Nico Collins, Michael Carter, De'Ami Brown. Yeah, so all these guys we were talking about last year as day 2 value picks, they all left. And I think that affected him. But I think for me, when I watch Sam Howell, I see a lot of 2021 Baker Mayfield, and that scares the crap out of me. And Sam Howell's not a guy that he would be my QB6 in this draft, but he's not a guy that I would have really any interest in.
Yeah, I think the Baker Mayfield comparison's perfect. And Sam Howell's tied with me for Desmond Ritter, but I gave Ritter the nod because of I do think that he is more athletic than Howell, and because I think Ritter's upside is a little bit higher than the best version of Baker Mayfield. So I ended up putting Ritter on there instead of Sam Howell. My honorable mention is James Harden. I'm joking.
Get that out of here. That's a different podcast. Another guy I do want to shout out, though, is Bailey Zappi from Western Kentucky. If you're looking for like a day 3 value pick that could maybe be he's probably not going to be a starter, maybe be a decent backup. Watch some Bailey Zappi at Western Kentucky. Yeah, it's Conference USA, but he put up video game numbers this year. Threw 687 passes, completed 70% of them. And he set the NCAA records for passing yardage with 5,967 yards and touchdowns with 62 touchdowns. So this Conference USA guy, he's only a 1-year starter, but I promise you, he got 2 years worth of experience throwing that many passes. So he could be an interesting guy to keep your eye on, somebody that'll be fun to watch in the preseason, and you'll probably never hear of him again. Does anybody have anybody else they want to throw out there before we get out of here today?
Nope.
All right, Deibs, you got any final thoughts for us?
Oh, man, there's nothing better than draft season, man. Tons and tons of draft content on this channel. I've got my safety rankings dropping over the next couple of days. And it's just been an honor, man. I'm glad we are doing this. I'm literally multitasking while during this show, refreshing Twitter. But thanks for giving me an hour of time that I can just take a deep breath and just have some fun, because I'm stressed out, as I said.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be back here weekly in the lead up to the draft. We're going to do these shows. We'll get you running back rankings next week. We'll throw in some mock drafts along the way, keep it fresh. So if you guys have questions about any particular prospect, you can shoot me a DM. You can tag us on Twitter. We'd love to interact with you guys. For my final thought, and Mark alluded to this earlier, but I said offline when we were talking about this show in pre-production that, to me, Mac Jones was clearly QB5 last year, and he would be my QB1 in this class. I think I see this class as pretty limited. Nobody in this class has really played as well in college as Mac did at Alabama. Nobody has shown that they possess the answers to their limitations the way that Mac did last year. I don't view this as a good quarterback class. Now, great QB prospects don't always pan out, and you always have guys that weren't highly thought of that are good. That doesn't mean there's not going to be good quarterbacks come out of this class. But just in terms of comparison, I do view this as a down year for quarterbacks. It's not a good year to need a quarterback. And you're going to see 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks go in the first round because it's the nature of the business. It's the most important position on the field. But there's just no comparison to me last year's QB class, which is one of the more talented in my lifetime, to this year's, which I would consider one of the weaker classes.
I think if you took my final thoughts would be, I think if you took Trevor Lawrence out of last year's draft class, I think these classes would be really comparable. But you can't take the best QB prospect I've ever graded in terms of my draft evaluation and take him out of a draft class. So I've got all my QB takes out. I will just do a quick plug for my gambling. If you follow me on Twitter, you have seen that I got a lot of buzz today for no reason. I've got a game of the year today. I'm 5-0 lifetime on game of the years, 4-0 in 2021, 1-0 in 2022. Purdue team total over 73.5. Go bet it. Hopefully I stay perfect on game of the years. And also, if you're a Sixers fan, 12 minutes ago, Chris Haynes reported that the Sixers and the Nets are seriously engaged in discussions about James Harden and Ben Simmons. So my brain is everywhere. College basketball, NBA, top 5 NFL draft quarterbacks. But I'm happy that Deibs came on to talk some NFL draft QBs. I was hoping that we'd get some news during the pod. But I have a feeling Deibs will be on to discuss rankings of prospects a lot over the next couple months.
Anytime, boys. Anytime.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for episode number 43 of Chalk Talk. We're going to get you covered all the way to the draft. If you enjoy what you heard on the show today, be sure and smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. Drop us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know what you think of this format, what you thought of our QB rankings. If you hate one of them because we left your guy out, tag us and tag Sam Howell, and we can have a conversation about it. You can follow me on Twitter at @halfandhalf_TPL. Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. Deibs is at Mr. Crockpot. So for me, From Mark, from Deibs, from the Painted Lines. We'll see you guys next time.